All right. We're not actually going live until like a minute from now, but because this is my first episode and I'm not really sure how StreamYard works, we're going to do it a little early just to make sure we're not screwing anything up. So, let's see. I think I think things are the way they're supposed to be. Let's find out. Let's find out. All right. Hello, comic creators. Welcome to the first episode of the Business of Comics podcast. If you are actually familiar with the work that I was doing over at Comics Experience or Comics Publishing Institute or Comics Connection, this is going to feel very similar. The only difference is the whole world can see it. So, because this is the first episode, we're going to maybe have to work things out as we go. And so I apologize in advance if anything is, I don't know, really screwed up. Here's how the program is supposed to work. I'm going to talk about the major news in the industry for the week. Then I'm going to add a little bit of color commentary about the industry overall. And then I will be available to answer any and all questions that you have until the questions run out. So, with that being said, let's get started with the news. The major story of the week actually involves digital comics and the big two. Earlier this week, Disney announced with Webtoon that they were going to provide a new digital platform for all Disney related comics. So that's going to be Marvel comics, it's going to be Star Wars comics, and probably other comics that I don't remember, considering how big Disney is. A couple days later, DC, in coordination with Global Comics, announced that they were going to have a day and date release on their comics. DC and Global Comics already had a deal to release comics on the Global Comics platform, but they were not day and date. They were delayed by a significant period of time. Now, the reasons why this is significant is because comics has lagged behind other forms of media in terms of adopting digital as the major distribution model. You have Spotify with music, you have TV and movies have dozens and dozens of different streaming platforms. And while there are digital platforms for comics, everything from Global Digital Comicsology, Global Comics, Sweet, Ichiban, and a lot of others, comic book readers, in large part, and I'm not talking about the Webtoons people, which I will get to in a second, they are very slow to adopt digital as the primary source of where they get their comics. And I was, for a very long time, an advocate for comics kind of following the other media kind of types into digital. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it's not necessarily a purely good thing. Because if you look at the amount of money certain creators make on those platforms, you realize it's not a silver bullet. Anybody who knows a musician who has music on Spotify knows that that musician is probably not making any money off Spotify. A lot of the movie streaming services are struggling for profitability, and it's kind of cratering the overall movie business. So perhaps until comics can actually find a way to make it profitable, and until you actually can get a way to reach more and more people with comics for them to buy them and read them, it remains to be seen whether this move is going to actually bring more people and more money into the comic book industry or not. That's like the big story of the week. But what I really wanted to talk about is, since this is the first episode of the Business of Comics podcast, I wanted to really start at the beginning and explain what the comic book industry is. Because a lot of people, I think, they get into it and they're looking at a very small segment of the industry and not actually appreciating the industry as a whole. So, allow me to elaborate. The comic book industry is any industry or any business that generates revenue from the existence of narrative sequential art. Now, that may sound overly broad, but that is because the comic book industry is actually quite broad. If you look at everything from webtoons all the way to the Wolverine video game and everything in between, there's a lot of different segments in the industry. The easiest way to actually understand how it works is to realize that there are two different ways you can make money in comics. You can make money directly or indirectly. If you're making money directly, your revenue stream, your business model is directly related to your relationship to the intellectual property. In a later episode, I plan to go into what intellectual property is and what business models are, but hold on to that thought for a second. There are three different types of direct ways to make money in comics. You can make money as an independent comic book creator, which means you own the IP. You can make money as a freelance comic book creator, which means you do not own the IP, but you get paid directly. Or you can make money as a creator-owned publisher, and you may or may not own the IP, depending on the deal that you have with the publisher. And again, as I said in Conan, that is a story for another time. The indirect ways of making money from comics are actually the more lucrative ways to make money from comics. And again, it is related to your relationship to the intellectual property. There is licensing, where you get permission from whoever owns the intellectual property to make things for your business. And that could be anything from t-shirts to toys to video games to movies to theme parks to anything that you could actually slap a logo or an image of a comic book character on, you could actually get a license for. When I started my career, well, a good way into my career, I was the international publishing manager for Marvel. And part of what I had to do was set up licenses for the different characters for different products, all different products. There is actually no product that Marvel was not willing to give a license to and put a product on. Even if the product itself, you couldn't really put a logo on. There was something called Juicy Juice, which is not actually juice, but it's kind of stuff that you could drink maybe, and you couldn't put a logo on it, but you could put a little plastic Spider-Man head on the top of the can, and now all of a sudden we can give you a license. And there's so many different types of licenses, from Funko to everything else. That's where a lot of the real, quote unquote, real money is. If you look at how much any movie makes, whether they say that movie is profitable or unprofitable, and it's based on a comic book, the people involved in that movie, I can almost guarantee you, all made more money than the people who made the comic. And that's just the economics of indirect businesses in comic book industry as opposed to direct. The other type of way you can make money in comics without making comics indirectly is through what I call investment. That's where you make a business or you put money into something that exists because there are comics. So if you buy stock in DC or in Webtoon, you're in the comic book industry. If you have a YouTube channel that either promotes or denigrates the comic book industry, you are in the comic book industry because you're generating revenue from that, hopefully. If you have a printing company, if you own a comic book shop, if you start a comic book convention, if you happen to be an attorney that represents comic book creators, you are in the comic book industry because you've invested and you generate money, hopefully, from that business. And if you take out comics, there really isn't a business. The reason why this is helpful and important to understand is for two reasons. If you're in the comic book industry and you want to have a career or build a business in the comic book industry, it is very helpful to understand how big and how many different facets of the comic book industry there are. Because in the 90s, the late 1900s, most people who wanted to be in the comic book industry, they were all fighting to work for the big two. In 2025, the big two aren't even really the big two anymore. And there are a lot of opportunities in webtoons, in independent comics, in conventions, in the direct market. You do not have to limit yourself to one facet of the industry. I have quite a few clients who their main business is they'll crowdfund the comic, then they'll do conventions, and then they'll do what's called direct to consumer sales from their website or conventions or anything else. And their business is thriving, but you'll never see their comic in a comic book shop. I have other clients, they're strictly on Webtoon and they're making six figures. They have an entire studio, but you'll never even see that book in print. There are other clients who are just doing character concepts and development. There are some who are just doing editorial services or creative services or marketing specifically for crowdfunding campaigns. There are a lot of different businesses and facets you can get into that can potentially make you money that are not the what is often narrowly construed as the comic book industry. And the final point is that there are certain media outlets or certain people on social media platforms who the entire premise of their channel is that the comic book industry is dying. And if you know anything about comic book history, people have been saying the comic book industry is dying since 1958 or whenever the Seduction of the Innocent hearings were with Henry Wortham. That is demonstrably not true, because if you look at the different segments of the industry, some of them are going down. Yes, some of them are struggling, but others are actually doing quite well. They're actually making millions and millions of dollars. So it all depends on what you look at and how you look at it and what you want to see that will lead you to the conclusion that the comic book industry is dying. And by the way, the people who have a platform where their main contention is the comic book industry is dying, they are in the comic book industry too. But if you take out the comic book industry, they don't have a channel. So be very careful when you are trying to figure out where you fit into the comic book industry to understand what you can do, where you can actually fit in, what the industry can offer you, and what you can offer the industry. And do not be as concerned that one segment, or maybe multiple segments, depending on how tariffs and taxes and everything else goes, may or may not be hurting, because comics in one form or another will continue to evolve as media and society continue to evolve. So now that I've rambled on for about 10 minutes, which is probably my limit, I'm going to see if there are any questions. If anybody has a question, please feel free to post it in the chat and I will answer it as quickly as I can. All right. Oh. Okay. Thoughts on the Disney ABC boycott being called due to Jimmy. I have heard, and this question is what we like to call comics adjacent, primarily because Disney owns Marvel and Disney owns, so which means the MCU and Marvel Comics and Marvel Games and everything else. So if Jimmy Kimmel, for those of you who don't know what's going on, if Jimmy Kimmel gets canceled, because of things that he said, which is not really because of things that he said, because if you listen to it, he didn't say anything, and is more because of a merger that ABC affiliates want to do. And the current administration is using the power of approving that merger to stifle. It's not even really dissent. It's some people have fragile egos and can't really deal with people talking about them, even though they talk about themselves and put themselves in a position to be talked about literally every day. How does this affect comics? How does this affect the comic book industry as a whole? That entire multifaceted thing that I just talked about. What the key is going to be, a lot of people are going to move away from, I believe, and this is something that it's not even my belief, it's something that's already happened. People are moving away from legacy media outlets. The FCC, as their primary method of kind of enforcing what goes on, is through legacy media. They can actually crack down on networks. They can actually crack down on movies to a large extent. They can actually crack down on a lot of things where they have ownership and control of the broadcast, the delivery of information to people. But we now live in a situation where the distribution of information is widely dispersed. If you read something like The Long Tail, or if you look at the way different media outlets are set up, YouTube is actually the largest streaming service in the world. It's not Marvel. It's not Disney. It's not ABC. It's not anything that the FCC actually controls. It's something that Google controls. It's something based on user-generated content. And the amount of reach, the amount of engagement that a lot of these YouTubers, TikTokers, people who are on different platforms is a lot more than any particular show or any particular person on any legacy network. So I have said that while I do not believe the government or the FCC or anybody else needs to be in the business of policing speech, because that's illegal, the reality is, if anyone who gets canceled from a network TV show, if they decided to take their audience, which is the same advice that I give to freelancers working for Marvel or DC or anybody else, take the audience that you have gained off of that platform, build your own platform and audience, and then get the actual message out that you want to get out. You may find that you are in a situation where the legacy media networks begin to collapse even faster. The power that the administration is trying to push onto society as a whole gets weaker, and the individual voices, because we all have the ability to amplify our individual voices because we have these things, become stronger. So, is it a problem? Yes. Are there solutions that each person, especially each creative person, can use to actually throw their voice into the discussion? Absolutely. And I strongly advise that you do that with the understanding that because you're in, by definition, if you are creating some form of content or some form of art, it is inherently political, which means there's going to be some people who like it and some people who do not like it. If you're going to get into that arena, you have to understand that you're going to have to deal with, one way or another, the people that do not like the nature of your content or the nature of you as a creator creating the content. You do not have to look far within the comic book industry to find examples of that, but that should not be a barrier to you going out and making the content, making the statements that you want to make. Stephanie, that was a long, rambling answer. I hope that actually helped somehow, some way. If there are no other questions, I think we can safely wrap it up for this first episode. If you have questions that you think of that you'd like to ask for the next episode of the show, the next episode of the show is scheduled for October 4th, which is a Saturday at 3 p.m. Please feel free to reach out to me directly on any social media platform. Just type Gamal Hennessy, you'll find me. If you have a specific legal issue that you want to get a free consultation for, again, reach out to me and I will be happy to set you up with a free consultation to walk through what you may or may not need from a business and legal perspective. If you are interested in starting your own independent comic book publishing company, I strongly recommend getting a copy of the Business of Freelance Comic Book Publishing that is available wherever you buy books in print and in digital. And you can also, if you would like to work as a freelancer and build a career that way in the comic book industry, there is the Business of Freelance Comic Book Publishing, also available in print and digital wherever you buy books. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And now you can get off the internet, enjoy your weekend, and go make some comics.